I want to bring in Lieutenant General Jerry Boykin, Lieutenant Colonel Michael Waltz, and our own Herb London is with us a lot. Herb, I'll start with you. Rex Tillerson saying more or less the ball is in their court. If it's true, reports already from a human rights group that the Syrian Air Force has launched planes out of this very airfield and perhaps are even launching strikes. Of course, not chemical strikes, but is that the immediate retort? And if that's the case, what does it mean?
Well, I think it's an immediate response, but keep in mind what we have here is an entirely new view of foreign policy. The Trump administration is saying leading from behind is over. The era of leading from behind does not exist. This president is going to make it clear that the United States is going to recognize its interest. When you see these children with foam coming out of their mouths, obviously these are heart-wrenching moments, and there's no question some sort of action was necessary. I applaud the comments that have been made by the Ambassador Haley at the United Nations, and I applaud Trump for taking a stand that I think is distinctly appropriate and very, very long-winded, long in coming. It should have happened much sooner. But there is no doubt that the red line that was created by President Obama, that line was written in invisible ink. It no longer exists, and this president is making it clear that the United States will take appropriate action when our interests are being jeopardized.
General Boykin, there's absolutely no doubt that for the past 8 years, these belligerent actors around the world have been emboldened by the feckless approach from President Obama. There's a new sheriff in town, but it feels like perhaps this first salvo may not be the last.
No, and look, Charles, I sincerely hope that this is the last thing that we have to do in Syria, you know, with regards to a strike or any other kind of significant military action beyond what we're doing now. That said, this is kind of reminiscent of the Jimmy Carter days when the world did not respect us because Carter put us in almost exactly the same situation that America is in today by not taking the lead, by not showing resolve and strength. And what did we see happen? We saw on the day that Ronald Reagan was brought into the office at his inauguration, 444 days later, they released our hostages.
Right.
I think what you're seeing here is very positive, and it shows resolve by Donald Trump. But most importantly, it shows that his national security apparatus is not in disarray. They made a decision and launched a strike in 48 hours. I think that's commendable.
There's no doubt the decisiveness of it, the accuracy, and Colonel Waltz, hearing about Reagan, a lot of people are comparing this to when Ronald Reagan hit Gaddafi, hit him very close, spooked him to the point where it was more than a decade before anyone even heard about him anymore. A lot of people are hoping that this will have the same sort of result, that Assad will perhaps fade into the background, and these sort of global atrocities that capture the global world's shock won't happen again.
Well, you know, as a military officer, I applaud this action. It's bold, it's decisive, and it's exactly what we need from the commander-in-chief. I think to your point of the effect around the world, I firmly believe, in talking to a number of diplomats, they're some of the happiest folks out there, aside from the Navy sailors that got to fire those missiles. But our diplomats now truly have some sticks to add to the carrots, and when they enter negotiations, whether it's North Korea, whether it's Libya, whether it's dealing with the Taliban or Iraq, they truly have the United States military standing behind them. And to your point of what's next with Assad, you know, there's been a lot of talk in the campaign and amongst policy circles of safe zones. I think we truly need to move forward to put those in place. It's going to be very complicated with the Russians, but we need to do it because, as the commander of NATO, General Breedlove said, Putin has weaponized refugees. He's done more to undermine Europe and European stability with refugee flows than he ever did with tanks along the Warsaw Pact border.
Guys, I want to bring up ISIS, because lost in this news was their deadliest attack in Syria this year. A mass killing, sort of saying, Herb, that we're not going away, we're still here. And ultimately, that was the idea was that we would work sort of hand in hand with Russia with the united goal of ridding of ISIS, particularly there in Raqqa, of course, being their de facto headquarters. What happens now? Do you think this message gets to ISIS? I mean, I think they're on a run anyway, but do you feel like this will change that dynamic?
Well, I'm not sure it will, but there's no question that ISIS will attempt to take advantage of this. They want to make further inroads into Syria. This may be an opportunity for them to do so. But they are in the...
By using this as a recruitment tool?
Well, it's a recruitment tool. It's a way of demonstrating that the United States can attack Assad if the Assad government is obliged to show its weakness, or if the Russians are unwilling to follow through, largely because they did give the green light on these bombings. Then it seems to me there may be an opportunity, a kind of vacuum that would be filled by ISIS. ISIS is on the run. There is no question. Our military has made great strides against ISIS, but we are now fighting two enemies. It is both ISIS as well as the Assad and Russian alliance.
On that note, General, it's so complicated here, and Russia, of course, you know, if you go and you look at the response checkbook from the Russian Assad side, Russia sends one of their ships closer towards ours in the Mediterranean. Assad sends aircraft from this runway to prove that he wasn't hurt or damaged. So I guess those are normal retorts that you would expect. What would be abnormal? What should we expect over the weekend? What are some of the possible things that could happen in your mind that could escalate this situation?
Well, first of all, I don't think the situation is going to be escalated. I think you're going to see a lot of posturing and a lot of bluster. The Russians have no choice, but the Russians do not want to go to war with America right now. The Russian military is not as strong as it may have been portrayed to be.
But are we prepared, sir, with all due respect, to go to war with Russia or to go to war in Syria? Because there's no public support for it. And we know that our military is spread pretty thin and been left in shambles after 8 years of neglect.
No, are you asking me if we want to go to war? Absolutely not. The American public doesn't and the military doesn't. That wasn't the question. The question is, what can we expect? And I'm just saying that I don't expect that this is going to escalate to the point that we're actually going to go to war with Russia. But let me finish this by saying, I also don't think that we should fear Russia. I don't think that we should take every decision with regards to national security based on whether the Russians are going to have a negative reaction to it.
That's right.
At some point, we've got to stand up to the Russians, and I think Donald Trump is on the pathway to doing that.
Real quick, Colonel, your final thoughts on that as well, and what happens to Syria, because it feels like Russia has the upper hand at this moment.
Well, not anymore. I think we've just taken the momentum away from them. But I just wanted to add to Herb's point of two wars going on, war against ISIS and the war with Assad. Assad, Russia, Iran, Hezbollah are not fighting ISIS. There's a misnomer there. We are not aligned. They're fighting every group but to try to eliminate any middle ground so that the world has a choice, a binary choice,
right.
Either choose ISIS or choose me. Well, clearly we don't want ISIS, so he's trying to stack the cards in his favor. But I think he just overplayed his hand.
Gentlemen, thank you all for your expert